Hey, good morning. Welcome back to Trent's Overtime Garage. Today we're going to work on this beauty. It's an '08 Mazda CX9, and we're going to do some brakes and some belts. And so nothing fancy here, but some common knowledge you will be able to apply to any vehicle. I'll show you a trick involved with the brakes and squeaking too. I got a handy tip for you. So let's get started. Gotta move the shop truck so we can get started on that. Okay, let's break these lug nuts loose, then lift the car up and take the wheels off so we have access to the brakes. All right, we got wheels off and lifted up in the air. And we'll get a little closer here. All these disc brakes are gonna be very similar on whatever vehicle you're working on. So first of all, to kind of look and see how the brake pads are doing, I like to look inside this access hole, and you can see this here is the brake portion right there. The other part to the left is the rotor, and over to the other side, that's the back of the pad. So I can see there's a lot of pad on there, and that's the inside one. If you go to this side and get some light on that, you can see the inside. There's the back of the pad, and then that little notch in there shows you how much pad is there. See if I can point at that for you. So that's right there. You can see that has enough brake pad left. And then the rotor, just looking at that, it's got a little bit of scuffing on it, but it doesn't look visibly wrong. Actually, this customer was complaining about vibration when at high speed. So what that's telling me is the rotor is a little bit out of round, has some run out in it. And you can either take care of that by machining it, which I don't know, is 15, 20, 30 bucks per rotor, or you can just buy new ones if they're close to that same price. On this vehicle, they are more than that. They're like 75 bucks a piece. But the customer decided they wanted to replace them. They haven't done that, so that's what we'll do. And I'll show you how we're going to take the caliper off. There's two parts to this. There is the caliper bracket, so that's this guy, and the caliper itself is here. Now it's attached with two bolts on the back side. There's one on the top and one on the bottom, and then the caliper bracket is attached with this bolt right here on top and bottom. This guy right there. Gotta aim at it. Okay, so this caliper slides back and forth on some pins that are attached to that bolt. So it just slides back and forth on there. And the pads are retained inside the caliper, and then they have little notch right here on both sides to retain them. So they're cradled in there by the bracket, but then the piston inside the caliper, that's what's squeezing the brakes. So it's all done hydraulically through this hose. And there's your bleeder valve right there. Little cap on it. Okay. So let's take those apart. I'm going to swap the rotor, and then I'll show you my little tip for squealing brakes, what I like to do with them. Alright, so I just pulled the caliper off with those two bolts here and here. It was bolts and pins actually, all built into one. So that's what those are sliding on. They thread into the back of the caliper there, you can see that right there. And then they're just sliding back and forth inside this bracket. So I took that off. It's real rusty and scuffed up. You can see this is the back of the pad. And so as I grab those will slide around inside the bracket. And you can kind of hear they're a little squeaky. So they're riding on those little metal inserts on both sides. And that's a grease point. So just a little foreshadowing, we're going to grease those up to help keep this thing from squeaking too much. And then the other spot, you can see where the caliper touches the back of the pad. That's actually this spot right here. You see it, there's an opening, but wherever it's touching the pad, so it's actually here and here, that is a potential spot where it can rub metal to metal and be squeaky. So we're gonna lube that up as well. And then on the back side where the pistons touch, you can see those two circles is where the two pistons contact. So it's those few spots that we're going to focus on greasing up to keep it from squeaking. And we're going to use this grease here. I got my secret stash. It's just a silicone brake lubricant, and built for that. Works really well. Get that at any auto parts store. So yeah, and before I do that, like I said, the customer wants to swap those rotors, and they're wobbling a little bit at speed, so we're going to do that. So we got to take the caliper bracket off, and then this would usually have a bolt here that's obviously not there, broken, and on this side too. So that'll just slide off, but this is probably going to be a little gummy, so I have to maybe smack on a little bit to work that off. And it's just slid over those 5 lug studs. All right. Okay, we're back together partway. You can see a new rotor slipped on there, and yes, as predicted, I had to smack on that old one just a little bit. Had some rust going on the inside, and like I said, visibly that rotor doesn't look terrible for the braking surface, but it was producing some vibration, either that one or the other side or both. So that's why we're switching to this new one. There's a minimum thickness noted on the outer rim of that. It's 26 millimeters on this one, and it was not under, this old one was not under that minimum, but like I said, it was warped a bit. So we got the new one on, we got the bracket remounted, and I've actually already greased those areas that we had talked about with that silicone grease lubricant, and one of the pads is set in there into the grooves in the bracket, and that brake pad actually looks terrible, but we're gonna keep running. I cleaned it off a little bit, the surfaces that touch the caliper, and then greased it. And then here is the back side. It's going to be going in. Before I put that in there, I'll show you the squeaker. When your brakes actually do wear out all the way, then that's going to touch on this rotor. When that pad has worn down far enough, it'll start squeaking on there. So if you've worn them down to where they're done, you'll hear a different kind of screeching. This one was just a minor squeak, just in reverse. So just the way the pads were kind of riding in there, and so we're re-greasing them to put it back together, and like I said, just replacing the rotor. But yeah, that's the actual wear indicator there. So let's see if I can get this mounted in there. Okay, there we go, just like that. And then we'll ready to slip the caliper over that and put the 2 bolts in the backside. And oh, by the way, grease those pins up too with the same. You want those to slide smoothly inside the caliper, and if they don't, you could have a problem with uneven wear of the pads or noise or vibration as well. So something to think about. Those are 20 or 30 bucks for the caliper bracket, so don't worry about replacing those. Do it if you need it. Alright. Okay, the caliper got slid on there. You can push those pistons in a little bit if it's tight, and it'll push fluid back up the lines. That's how that hydraulic piston works. So you can open it up a little bit just by pushing on it, or put it on the pads part way and then kind of pull on it to squeeze it into place, and then put the 2 bolts in the back. Then a little brake cleaner on the new rotor will get any manufacturing oils off of it. And then noticed I used a little piece of baling wire to hang that caliper on while I was working on it. So we'll throw that out to the side, and the next thing we're going to do is swap the serpentine belts that are behind this cover. So I'll pull that apart and then get you a look on that. There's a couple belts over here that run on this motor, so they looked worn. We're going to replace them as a little bit of maintenance for our friend here. All right. Okay, with that cover removed, we can access part of the area you need for these belts. You can see there are 2. One is going from the crank to idler to alternator to AC. Then there's one just over to the power steering pump. And there's no adjustment or tensioning on that, so supposedly you're able to stretch these belts. This one is called a stretch multi-V belt. And so we're going to attempt it kind of like a bike chain. We'll get it set up there and then turn the crank to spin that on, and I expect that to be very difficult. The other one just has a tensioner, so it should be okay. All right. Okay, I am literally blown away at how well this went. I was expecting a huge fight, but so I took some pictures of the setup. There's a zip tie you can hardly see on the top there now because I turned it. But I put that belt on and I put the zip tie right through one of those little holes, and just to kind of hang on to it, then got it started by holding it with my hand and then turning this crank clockwise. Ended up needing a board to kind of stabilize the extension, but as I turned that around, just pulled it on just like a bike chain. And now I need to snip that zip tie, but it's on there ready to rock and roll. So now we'll put on the other belt and go for it. Okay, mission accomplished. The other belt is kind of a two-man operation because the tensioner, you got to reach from the top, and you need someone to keep a hold of the belt so it doesn't fall off. But yeah, belt's replaced. I'll put that cover back on and that's it. That's all there is to that. Notice I snipped the old power steering belt off, and it didn't look terrible. It's kind of the shape of it there, but the other serpentine belt you can see is wearing ridges into it, and so as a preventative maintenance I just went ahead and changed it. Sometimes these will be cracked. These don't look cracked on the inside, but it was making a little bit of noise, so we just had to change them. Then multiply the little brake job we did by 3 more, just for good measure. Make sure it doesn't squeak. Change the other rotor on the front. At least do 2 at a time if you're ever doing brakes. Do the fronts together, rears together. Other than that, good to go. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and you'll get to hear what we're working on next. All the different car projects and home projects we're doing at Trent's Overtime Garage. Thanks, guys.